So the reason that many of you are here today is because you might be looking into the public cloud. And what we've noticed is that most of our customers, when considering a move to any of the public cloud vendors, are usually looking into a hybrid scenario. Specifically with Azure, you know, a lot of organizations might even be looking into Azure Stack. And so they come to Palo Alto Networks to know, hey, what do we have to do to secure this? And is there a need to secure Azure, right? So some of the threats that come to Azure are similar to what you'll see on-premise. And the reason for that is that attackers and the malicious black hats out there are location agnostic, right? You know, you see a data center on your left, you see one on your right, and you can't really, you wouldn't be able to tell which one is in the public cloud and which one is an on-premise data center. And so any attacker doesn't care either, right? It doesn't matter to them. All they care about is their end goal, whether that's exfiltrating data or leveraging your resources to do something like mining Bitcoin that we'll explain about in a second here. So if, you know, the threats are there, what's the attack life cycle like? That's a question I get from many customers that I speak to. And it's going to be very similar to what you're seeing on premise, right? User gets infected maybe by phishing email or something of that nature. They gain foothold, moving laterally, and ultimately executing their goal. Whether that's, you know, stealing data, you know, customer data, user data, IP, whatever it might be, or even harvesting Bitcoin in certain situations. What we found is we've actually had customers that have come back after a weekend and had a huge bill from one of the public cloud vendors because of this. So, you know, it's important to set those alerts for yourself to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. And, you know, it is a real threat out there. So if you just Google that today, you'll be able to find some information around that and what's happened to certain organizations and certain end users. Another thing that we're finding is that different resources can actually be sold on the dark web. So this is an example of a very popular marketplace on the dark web called the Xdetic Marketplace. And a business risk intelligence firm named Flashpoint actually found that information related to over 85,000 organizations or servers that related to over 85,000 organizations are being sold today on this site. So it's not just startups, it's not just state and local education organizations, it's not just your big enterprises, it truly is everyone here today. So what they're purchasing is different RDP servers, and they're monetizing these immediately. Example over here is a specific resource that's being sold for over $15,000. So you might ask yourself, well, why is it coming at such a high price? So the reason is over here you can see administrative privileges and user information, over 3,200 records here. This specific system or server is related to point of sale systems. So it has a lot of customer data that you wouldn't want getting out there, and it's immediately monetizable, right? And with these different malicious attackers, it's all business to them, the amount of money that they can make by selling these resources. And $15,000 for a single resource is enough to definitely satisfy their interest. So we know the threats are there. And many of you might be thinking, well, I thought Azure was secure, right? And it's true that it is. And Microsoft does an amazing job at securing its infrastructure. I was actually told by one of Microsoft sales reps a little while ago that Microsoft is spending over $1 billion in total to secure its different assets in Azure today. So when it comes to the compute, storage, database, and networking, that's all true. You know, physically, their data centers are extremely secure. But when it comes to your application that sits inside of Azure and your data and content, that's still your responsibility to secure. So it's important that you have a high level of security, and it's similar to security posture to what you have on premise today to secure your different applications and customer content that's up there. And that's why Palo Alto Networks is bringing the same prevention-based philosophy that we bring into on-premise today. We're giving you complete visibility into users and applications because you can't protect what you can't see. We're helping you to reduce the attack surface, right? So to block the bad apps, enable the apps that we believe are safe, but scan those and check those for known and unknown threats. You know, some of the differences between us and our competitors are port and protocol-based solutions are a great start to protecting yourself. But because applications can go up on various ports, it's important to actually base different protections on the application and not the port itself. And again, preventing the known threats is obvious, but also preventing the unknown threats, right? The 0 days, and you need to do that in an automated manner. Why do you have to do that in an automated manner? Well, and what I mean by that is when someone sees a malicious file or something at Palo Alto Networks, one of our customers does, that information is sent to every single one of our firewalls, whether they be virtual or physical. So you get a large amount of protection. So you need to protect yourself on all applications. Even encrypted traffic is important as well, and obviously in the public cloud. And that's why we brought our VM series for Azure, right? It brings the same exact solution set as you have on premise, our URL content filtering, Wildfire for sandboxing, threat prevention for IPS, IDS, and our GlobalProtect for mobile VPN. So how does this differ from the firewall that you get from Azure today? The difference is that while network security groups are a great start to protecting yourself, it's a port and protocol-based firewall. So it's a great way to reduce your attack surface to ensure that you're blocking all potentially the ports you want to protect against. But when you're looking for that visibility on-prem and also in the cloud, that application user visibility, again, that reducing the attack surface, known unknown threats, that's what you want to bring Palo Alto Networks in. So if you truly have an application that's mission critical for yourself, or even if you have some customer data or even a dev test environment, it might be important to speak to your Palo Alto Networks rep and your security advisor to understand where you need to protect yourself. As far as application visibility, this is just a screenshot of a graphical user interface that's identical whether your firewall is on-prem or in a virtual environment like Azure. And with our Panorama tool, you can actually centrally manage all your devices from a single pane of glass. What's really cool is you actually can even tell whether or not a device is on-premise or in the cloud. It's going to be exactly the same, which is a beautiful thing. So you don't just get that application visibility, you also get geo visibility into where you should, your data is going in and out of, right? Your source regions and destination regions. One of our most senior architects told me that it's amazing to him how lazy these malicious attackers are, right? We've actually found that most people won't even hide where they're coming from. So blocking certain states like Russia or China might make sense in certain situations for organizations. So what can our VM series do for you? Well, segmenting applications, as I'd mentioned, because we have that app and user visibility. Also, protecting yourself on a subnet to subnet basis, or even from your different VNet or VNet, which is your virtual network inside of Azure. As I had mentioned, our threat intelligence cloud, Wildfire, is one of the largest threat intelligence clouds out there. And regardless of whether we see a malicious file on-prem or in the cloud, within 5 minutes, we're going to actually send that to all the different firewall devices that are in our Palo Alto Networks network in a sense, right? And it's not just the firewall. Our endpoint protection solution, our SaaS security solution, are all connected together. It's a true prevention-based platform. So you're protected from a different array of resources out there. And if you're getting attacked by something, a good chance is that another education district is getting attacked by them as well, another large school, because these attackers are using automated approaches and are a lot of times doing a spray and pray sort of attack cycle. So I'd mentioned we're turning those unknown threats into known for you. As far as Streamline policy management, as I mentioned, Panorama, our centralized management solution, is able to allow you to essentially manage all your applications from a single pane of glass. Every time you actually can deploy one of our Palo Alto Networks devices, you can automatically bootstrap that VM series to have the PanOS configuration, all the security policies be updated with different software updates that you have, all directly to that VM series that you're going to deploy in Azure. We're working very quickly to develop a lot of GitHub resources for all of our clients. So we actually have a large array of scripts and templates, and we're constantly creating more to make it really easy for our customers to leverage our solutions. One of the templates that we have is actually with the Application Gateway. Application Gateway in Azure is a web load balancer that has SSL offload and allows you to also have a web application firewall connected to that application gateway. So you're able to protect your web app and then do east-west inspection and also get information out to the data center that's all being secured by a single pair of Palo Alto Networks devices. And how we provide high redundancy in the cloud isn't your standard HA approach of active-passive. We actually provide an active-active approach to security by placing 2 of our virtual appliances in an availability set in Azure. And so what this does, it actually allows you to have redundancy in case of, in different fault and update domains, in case there's some sort of outage in Azure, or potentially a software update that could bring a certain rack in the data center down, and you would still be up with our Palo Alto Networks solution. All the different ways we get HA with Azure load balancers can be done with Azure native tools. If you want to use another third party like an F5 or a different load balancer, you can, but you can actually leverage Azure native tools that are free of cost to you to do this as well, which is really great. So you might be asking, what are some of the different deployment use cases that we have today? So we have 4 main use cases out there, right? The hybrid approach, using our VM series as a termination point, using us for segmentation, as an internet gateway, and also for remote access. So you can use our VM series as that termination point into Azure. And for certain organizations that have really invested deeply in Azure and are doing something with ExpressRoute, you can actually put our hardware devices in a colo location, such as an Equinix, to be able to secure yourself as well. Also, you can do that east-west inspection. So north, south, east, west can all be done with a single pair of firewalls if needed. If you have a web server talking to a database server and you only want certain types of traffic flowing through, that's something you can protect with Palo Alto as well. And again, with our VM series, all the same feature sets, so you can have GlobalProtect on there as well, in case you have a branch office. Or maybe you're an organization that you want to boot up one of our VM series in another country because you have a professor who's traveling, and you want to make sure that that their endpoints are protected, whether it's their phone or their laptops as well, right? So really leveraging that global breadth that Azure provides you. Azure actually has, I believe, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong once you kick off here, but over 40 different regions today, and they're constantly expanding, and I believe they actually have the largest number of data centers in the world today compared to any of the other public cloud vendors.
Yeah, that's correct. We have 42 today.
Okay, 42. Always growing, right? And that's a great thing, and why we brought Eric on today, because Azure is things are always changing in Azure, right? They're constantly updating, constantly growing, and constantly serving their clients better. Some of the licensing options that you have today are a little different from on-premise, right? Today, you can either bring your own license, so procure from a value-added reseller just like you do today from Palo Alto Networks. But in addition to that, you can actually download our solution directly from the marketplace. So you can actually go in the Azure portal, just download our solution, and consume it on an hourly basis. This is for organizations maybe with elastic workloads or someone just playing around testing us out. But if you ever want to get a proof of concept going, just reach out to your local Palo Alto Networks rep, your value-added reseller. We'd be happy to send you a proof of concept unit as well. Additionally, we have our VM series ELA, and this provides you with a single auth code and limitless consumption across separate clouds. What's really cool about this is that in a lot of organizations we speak to, the dev team is being slowed down by the security ops team. That's because, security ops wants to make sure there's that high level of security posture inside of Azure, no matter where, different workloads are in that case, right? And the issue for organizations is that usually the faster dev teams are allowed to push new applications through, that can be a revenue driver for many of our customers. So by leveraging tools like Terraform and Ansible for configuration management, you're actually able to automate the deployment of our firewall in every workload that you're putting up into the cloud. What that means is that you're ensuring your same level of security posture and the policies that you would like by leveraging our centralized management tool, Panorama. So you can get an unlimited amount of consumption, which really lets you, move forward with your cloud strategy without being held back in any way, shape, or form. And you also get an unlimited consumption of our Panorama as well. And the reason for that is you might be deploying, several firewalls, maybe even in a scaled out approach for certain applications. It's a little different than on-premise and what you're used to purchasing one large device. In the public cloud, it makes more sense to spin up and down resources because of its elastic nature. So that's it for my presentation today. I'm going to hand it off to Eric, who again is one of the Azure specialists over at Microsoft. Eric, really appreciate you taking the time, and I'll kick it off to you.
Thank you, Tal. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We're going to now transition a bit to focus a little bit more on Azure. Of course, as we get to the end of the slide, we're going to talk about networking specifically, and you'll see how that ties back into what Tal just presented. Again, my name is Eric DeBoard. I'm an Azure Technical Solutions Professional based in the West Region. I do lots of updates on LinkedIn and on Twitter. If you want to follow me, I've provided my information there. So the first thing I want to mention here is just our layered physical and logical security that we have in Azure. So this is something that, would be obviously something that would be standard, but we just like to talk about it just to make sure everyone's familiar with this. So perimeter security, every region in Azure has perimeter security. This could be a berm, this could be a lake, this could be some kind of physical boundary that prevents any kind of penetration into our data centers. We obviously have fire suppression and detection systems. Multi-factor authentication is required to enter any of our regions. And then, of course, extensive monitoring. What I do want to point out here, however, is if you see these blue circles, we do war game exercises on a regular basis between two teams, the red and blue team at Microsoft. Basically, one of these teams is always attempting to attack and penetrate our networks, while the other team is trying to detect and prevent those attacks. So we also simulate insider attacks. So if you think about Azure overall, we're going to have a number of customers out there who have solutions in Azure, and those customers could be using those services to attack other customers. So we do have the ability to do insider attack simulation as part of that. We also have a zero standing permissions policy. So if you put resources, data, virtual machines, anything in Azure, you can rest assured that no one at Microsoft has access to your data unless you open a ticket and go through the process of approving access, at which point access will be provided for a limited period of time to help you troubleshoot any issues you're having. Another thing to mention here is, of course, encryption of data in Azure is available to you at rest and, of course, in transit. So anything that you're backing up out there or putting out there, you can choose to encrypt it. And, of course, as it goes out to Azure, it will be encrypted in transit as well. One of the things that we talk about is defense in depth in Azure. And so what this means is we take physical infrastructure, network, and VM app security very seriously through a number of different means. So, for example, our physical security we just talked about with the barriers, the security staff, cameras, and alarms. When you think about infrastructure, we are securing our infrastructure by design. So we have operational security controls. We have compliance certifications that we'll talk about shortly. We do the penetration testing that we just talked about. We provide distributed denial of service protection as well. As you move into the network, any network that you deploy in Azure is going to be a fully isolated virtual network. So as you put resources into virtual networks in Azure, they are fully isolated until the day comes along that you build a bridge to those networks to bring them back on premises. And you can do those with the devices that Tal was just mentioning. With those, we also provide the ability to place ACLs used forced tunneling so that anything that's running in Azure is forced to tunnel back through on-premises devices. Of course, there's a number of security appliances that we just talked about. And then any of your virtual machines can have multiple virtual NICs to allow those security appliances you place in there to basically act as boundaries between different subnets. From a VM and app perspective, we, of course, provide anti-malware tools from many vendors. We have Key Vault. That is a hardware appliance in Azure that you can use to store your keys. That actual appliance in Azure in the data center is physically secured to the point is if someone starts tampering with it, it does self-destruct. So your keys are fully protected even inside the data center with this Key Vault device. We provide role-based access controls to your entire environment, and that uses your Azure Active Directory, which is synced from on-premises directory. So if you create users on-premises, you sync those out to Azure. Those are automatically placed out there, and consequently, if you also remove users, those are automatically removed from Azure. So you use the same directory system you've used for years to basically provide access to Azure. One really interesting technology that we provide in Azure is called Azure Security Center. Azure Security Center is a product that lays over your entire Azure infrastructure, and it provides you with some really interesting capabilities. It provides you with a preventative side of security and a reactive side. So a preventative side of security is, it will tell you, it's basically a best practices dashboard for security. So if you have virtual machines deployed with IP addresses, or you have encryption with externally facing IP addresses, I should say, or you have storage deployed without encryption, or you have firewalls that aren't connected to certain applications in Azure, Security Center gives you that information live. So you click in Security Center in Azure, it basically enumerates from a security standpoint all of the issues that you need to resolve to prevent attacks. However, the flip side of that is we have a reactive side of Security Center. So if you, for example, have web services deployed in Azure, and those web services are being attacked by a brute force attack or possibly a SQL injection, we actually surface that information to you in Security Center and in the reactive area of the tool. And so these heuristics of attacks are very well known to Microsoft. We've been deploying data centers across the globe for many years, beginning way back in the 90s with Hotmail. We understand heuristics of attacks. We understand the sources of bad IP addresses, and we can give that information to you proactively as part of this Azure Security Center tool. Some of the other capabilities that this tool provides is just-in-time VM access. So if you have VMs that are exposed on public IP addresses for purposes of providing web services or other things, you can actually set these up to allow you as an administrator into these boxes for purposes of a support incident, for example. This just-in-time VM access allows you to log into the portal, request access, put a timer on it, and then Azure will be on its own later on shut down access to that VM from the outside for you automatically. It's just part of just-in-time access. This tool also provides adaptive application controls. So if you have applications that you know are valid that run in your virtual machines, you can put those on a whitelist, and this tool will prevent any applications from running that aren't on that whitelist. This may be challenging to see, but this is an example of what the dashboard looks like in Azure for Azure Security Center. So it gives you, in this case, we're looking at, in the blue highlight, it's difficult to see, it says brute force attack is being attempted against this resource. On the right, bottom right there, you can see that this attack is coming from somewhere in Eastern Europe. And so this is the type of data that you would get from the reactive side of Azure Security Center. Switching gears just a bit, so a number of our customers obviously are very interested in making sure they are meeting compliancy requirements for their different organizations. Azure does have the largest compliance and attestation offering in the industry. Just a few months ago, this was 54. This continues to grow. This covers compliances in FERPA, HIPAA, in the IRS space, CJIS, the Criminal Justice Department, ITAR. You can see a list of some of them here. We have ISO. This is a huge commitment of Microsoft to make these compliances available. So what you'll find is that there's a huge staff required to make these happen. The audits happen in every single region in Azure, and as we mentioned earlier, there's 42 of those regions. So significant capabilities here to enable you to feel secure in putting your infrastructure in Azure. Now, how do those compliances and attestations apply to you? It is a shared responsibility. And if you know about cloud, you know that cloud is categorized into a number of types of cloud computing. So you have infrastructure as a service, you have platform as a service, and you have software as a service. This graphic here on the left is showing all blue for on-premises workloads. What this is depicting is, from a compliancy responsibility perspective, for on-premise you have full responsibility for everything that you put on-premises, from the networking and storage all the way up through the applications. As you deploy infrastructure into Azure, if you start with infrastructure as a service, meaning you're putting virtual machines in Azure, our compliance requirements that we just reviewed are covering you all the way up through the virtualization layer. So no more do you have to be worried about the compliance responsibilities for networking, storage, servers, and virtualization. You basically manage compliance from the operating system up the stack. As you move into platform as a service offerings such as web apps, SQL database, machine learning, other capabilities, that is even becoming more of Microsoft's responsibility. So at this point, you're basically only responsible for the data itself, any compliance requirements that are applied to data, and your applications and how those applications are provided. Now, of course, Office 365 is an example of software as a service, and in that case, we provide full compliance for that solution. Now, one of the things that a lot of my customers are curious about when they start deploying to Azure is, how do I control Azure? How do I provide access to it? How do I manage it? And so this is all sort of falling under Azure Governance. And so if you look at this slide we have here, on the left we're talking about Azure Policy and Audit, and on the right, naming standards. So naming standards are still going to be important for you as you think about cloud technologies. If you have a naming convention on premises, you're going to want to continue to use that naming convention or one similar in the cloud to help you manage it. The policy capabilities that we have with Azure give you the ability to say, for example, these users are not allowed to deploy resources anywhere except in the U.S. West region. So you can put controls onto where services can be deployed. We also give you the ability to use role-based access control. So if I have users in Active Directory syncing to Azure, or I have groups in Active Directory syncing to Azure, I can use those groups to assign access in Azure to users to be able to deploy virtual machines or to create networks or to own subscriptions. So it's all based on the same users and groups you've been using for years. You can also place resource locks on resources in Azure. So maybe you've got something deployed, you don't want to make sure that someone doesn't accidentally delete it. You can put resource locks to basically lock those resources down. We have Security Center that we just talked about that helps you govern Azure. We have Azure Automation. This is just like System Center Orchestrator on premises, except now it's adapted to the cloud. So you can build runbooks and all sorts of different scripts to run and automate your environment and apply to your Azure infrastructure. Now at the top here we have subscriptions and an enterprise agreement. Basically, when you get an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, that gives you the ability to start creating subscriptions, and subscriptions are actually where resources get deployed. So a number of capabilities here to govern your infrastructure out in Azure. We've talked about Azure AD. I just want to take a moment to talk about some of the other benefits that brings to you. Of course, it's a single source of identity and access management. One of the things that we provide with Azure Active Directory, which is really interesting because now it is in the cloud, we provide anomaly detection. So if you are logging into an application that is cloud-based or you're logging into the Azure portal, we understand that if you're logging in from Los Angeles one moment and you're logging in from New York City the next moment, that's an anomaly. And we detect those anomalies and we can take action on those anomalies based on how you want us to take action. So those are some of the new capabilities coming with Azure AD. Of course, this extends your Active Directory you have on premises, as we talked about. It can be provided for single sign-on to not only Azure and Office 365, but to a number of third-party applications. We can use that with multi-factor authentication, so that when you have users that are logging into these applications, we can, for example, request that they prove themselves with some kind of authentication app, with a phone call, or with a virtual smart card, for example. And then we also provide you with new capabilities such as self-service password reset with Azure. So if you've implemented self-service password reset applications in the past, or you're thinking about implementing those, Azure Active Directory can be used for something as simple as that. and it will use the multi-factor authentication to help ensure that that password reset is done from the person who is supposed to be doing it. Now, as we talk about storage, there's a lot of security capabilities and trust capabilities built into storage. First of all, Azure storage is resilient and secure. We provide encryption as a toggle button. When you deploy a storage account in Azure, you can turn encryption on. What that means is you're saying, Microsoft, I want you to encrypt this Azure storage with your keys. I don't want to manage the keys, and I know no one will have access to those keys unless I ask them through a support ticket of some sort. You can also bring your own encryption, so two separate options there. This is using the key vault that I talked about earlier, which is the physical device that can self-destruct in the Azure Data Center. You can put your own certificates and keys in that to encrypt your own storage in Azure. The concept of extreme durability in Azure is what is known as the 3-copy algorithm. So as you place storage into Azure, we are making 3 copies of that storage behind the scenes, so that if something becomes corrupt or there's bit rot of some sort, we can actually reach out and get a valid copy of that storage and replace the storage that is having issues. Now, I was speaking with one of our platform, our product group storage members last week, and he was talking with me and another customer, and Azure has never lost any storage, any data from our customers since the day that Azure was put into production. And a big part of that is because of this extreme durability. And that's something that you will not get from any of the other cloud vendors today. Azure is the only cloud that has never lost customer data, and this is one of the main reasons. Of course, Azure is trusted by more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies. There's broad validation across the industry, and we are leading investments in compliance, as I mentioned earlier. Focusing a little bit more on networking, if you were to deploy a virtual machine in Azure today, or you've already got one deployed out there, there's several layers of protection that are built around that virtual machine. Starting from the inside, of course, you have a virtual machine that has a firewall capability that's right inside the operating system if you choose to turn that on. So that's this first ring of security we're depicting here. As you go out from the firewall, we have what are known as network security groups, which provide access control lists. Tal mentioned that earlier. These are static rules that basically lock down ports or allow ports to and from addresses of your choosing. It is not an active and smart firewall. It is just a rule for ports. As you go further out the ring, we have VNet isolation. What that means is anytime you deploy a virtual network in Azure, it's fully isolated from any other network of your own in Azure or from any other customer using network virtualization technology. Finally, the final ring here is distributed denial of service protection. So to the extent you have any resources in Azure that are exposed publicly on public IP addresses, such as websites, virtual machines, load balancers, we have a wrapper around Azure entirely that provides distributed denial of service protection. You do not have to do anything to make that enabled. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free, and it's exactly the same protection that we use for Xbox Live, for Office 365, for all of our cloud services that we expose publicly. And so these are the services that we provide as part of the platform. And of course, as we move into this next slide, I want to help you understand what a network in Azure might look like. And I know this slide might be difficult to see. There's a lot happening here. But what I'm depicting here on the far right, the gray box that's the biggest box, is an Azure VNet. An Azure VNet is a virtual network in Azure where I define an address space, and you can see here that this one is defined as 10.0.0/16. Within that virtual network, I define subnets. Okay, and what we're showing here in these subnets are a business tier, a data tier, a web tier. Each of these subnets has what is known as a network security group. You can see that it depicted as a lock. Those are those firewall rules that we just mentioned, and these are preventing, traffic from coming in and out of these subnets from other subnets or even from the outside internet. And so you have the ability to isolate these subnets in the same way you would isolate VLANs on premises. And what we're trying to depict in this slide is that as you think about networking, if you were to deploy a secondary site on premises, how would you secure that network? How would you define subnets? How would you define VLANs? How would you put appliances between those networks? You can do all of that in Azure as well. Over here on the right, or on the left, I'm sorry, just inside the gray box, you see here we have a couple of monitors. It looks like monitors that have the letters NVA on them. These are network virtual appliances. And in this case, we're depicting a network virtual appliance that has a VNIC in one subnet and a VNet in a different subnet. These are, for example, Palo Alto devices, and these are where you can actually filter traffic based on more intelligent rules and from solutions like Palo Alto to take higher level action against traffic that's flowing in your networks. Ultimately, however, you want to get the traffic in your Azure VNet back to on-premises, or potentially do. Sometimes we build VNets in Azure and we only expose them publicly, but of course you can connect those back to on-premises so that you have what is like in a secondary site. And so what we're doing here is we're providing you the ability to build tunnels between your on-premises network and Azure. We provide many ways of doing that, whether it be a VPN tunnel or be a private dedicated connection through what is known as Azure Express Route. So we can go all the way from 200 megabit connectivity all the way up to 10 gig of connectivity. In addition, instead of deploying an Azure platform solution for connectivity, you could put a Palo Alto device in this inbound subnet here that's depicted on the left and connect that back to on-premises to another Palo Alto device to provide that VPN connectivity. So you have a lot of options in how you want to provide that connectivity. So that's really what we wanted to talk today about and how we team up with Palo Alto and some of the security that we provide both from the platform itself and through partnership with Palo Alto.